The throne chamber of the Galactic King glittered with enough stolen treasures to bankrupt a solar cluster. Vaulted ceilings shimmered with gems mined from worlds whose names the king could not pronounce, and the air carried the sterile perfume of conquered gardens. Armored courtiers lined the obsidian steps, their mandibles clicking in self-satisfaction as they gazed upon their ruler's latest trophy. For once, the prize was not jewels or starships. It was flesh, wrapped in the strange softness of humanity. A family of 4 stood before him, bound in radiant coils of energy. They looked small under the throne's cold glow. A father with dark hair peppered in gray at the edges, a mother with calm eyes that seemed far too steady, and 2 children. A boy with restless feet tapping the marble floor, and a girl clutching a ragged stuffed bear as though it might shield her from galaxies. The courtiers whispered, amused. What harm could such fragile creatures pose? Their bones were thin, their skin unarmored. They appeared laughably ordinary. The king rose, stretching his plated wings wide, savoring the gasps of awe. His voice was a deep thunder rolling through the chamber. Behold, my lords and ministers, from the primitive orb they call Earth, I present to you specimens. He let the word linger like an insult. Rare, exotic, and helpless. The court erupted in cruel laughter, and the boy flinched at the sound. His father leaned slightly toward him, murmuring, "Easy, champ," under his breath. The words were swallowed by the hall's echo, but the mother heard, and her lips quirked with the faintest shadow of a smile. One minister, his scales lacquered gold, stepped forward with exaggerated bows. "Majesty, you honor us. Such simple beasts will make delightful curiosities in your menagerie." He peered at the family with predatory interest. Their eyes are so wet, one might think them constantly mourning. "They call that crying," another sneered. "A bodily weakness." The king extended a taloned finger toward the children. "Observe their trembling. They know instinctively who rules them. Fear is the universal language, and I am fluent." He laughed, a terrible sound meant to cow armies. But the mother did not flinch. Her gaze met his with unnerving steadiness. For the first time in his reign, the king felt something almost like irritation. He stepped down from his throne, talons clacking against the marble, and circled them as though they were animals. The father shifted subtly, keeping himself angled between the king and his children. Polite but protective. The mother remained still, every motion contained, her posture deceptively relaxed. She seemed less a prisoner than a guest, measuring the size of her host's dining table. "You are fortunate," the king intoned, pacing. "Most humans cower on their miserable little mud world, shielded by obscurity. But you," he gestured broadly, "you will dwell here in the heart of power, displayed so that all may know I have conquered even the myths that crawl in backwater stars." The father cleared his throat. "Appreciate the hospitality," he said lightly, voice edged with dry humor. "Though back home we usually offer coffee before making folks into exhibits." The chamber fell silent. Translators rendered his words into the court's tongue, and confusion rippled. "Coffee," a minister repeated, baffled. Another asked, "Is this a weapon?" The father only shrugged, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. The guards bristled, uncomprehending, while the king snarled. Yet laughter bubbled faintly from the children, disarming in its innocence. The boy muttered, "Told you Dad would say something dumb." The girl squeezed her bear tighter, whispering, "It's not dumb, it's funny." Their normalcy unsettled the chamber. Humor was not a weapon the king understood. He lashed his tail against the floor. "Silence. Your primitive sounds are irrelevant. You exist here only by my command." The mother finally spoke, her voice calm, almost courteous. "Command is a fragile thing, Majesty. It lasts only as long as obedience does." The words were delivered with polite intonation, like one might comment on the weather. Yet something in the tone, the composure, made the air grow colder. The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Her eyes did not shine with fear. They measured, calculated, remembered. The king dismissed the unease with a scoff. "Take them to the holding chambers. Tomorrow they shall be paraded for my citizens." Guards moved forward, and the energy coils tightened. The father placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. The girl's bear dragged against the polished floor, leaving a faint squeak of fabric. The sound echoed louder than expected, like a warning note. As the family was escorted out, one old advisor with translucent skin leaned toward the king. "Majesty," he whispered, "there are tales. Long ago, human commanders." The king cut him off. "Fairy stories told by cowards. These are nothing more than soft animals. You will not cheapen my triumph with superstitions." But the old advisor's eyes lingered on the mother, and a chill settled into his bones. He had seen that stillness once before, long ago, on battlefields where human strategies bled empires dry. In the sterile corridors of the palace, the family was marched to their cell. The guards snickered at their soft steps and muttered about fragility. Yet inside the glowing cage, the mother began to hum softly, an old earth lullaby. The guard sneered. "Pathetic. They sing before despair." But the children's shoulders eased, and the father leaned back against the wall, eyes closing briefly, as if he knew the tune carried more than comfort. It carried resolve. That night, surveillance orbs captured curious images. The children drew on the walls with small wax crayons taken from their satchels. Strange lines, arrows, little boxes. Guards chuckled. "Look at them. Primitive art." They laughed until one realized the markings resembled schematic diagrams, the kind military tacticians used. He reported it, only to be mocked. "Are you afraid of children's doodles?" they jeered. But unease lingered. Hours passed. A guard patrolling near their chamber failed to return. His comm crackled once, then silence. Search parties found him unconscious, locked in a supply closet, muttering in terror. He swore he had seen the woman's eyes glow in the dark. Those sensors confirmed nothing unusual. The court dismissed it as incompetence. Yet whispers spread among the lower ranks. By dawn, rumors flooded the palace. Servants claimed the human mother walked the chamber as though measuring paces, her fingers brushing each seam in the wall. Some insisted she counted guards under her breath, never losing track. One minister scoffed aloud at breakfast. "Nonsense. She is a housewife, nothing more." But the old advisor shook his head. "A housewife who does not cry, does not plead, and does not tremble. Mark me, this is no common mother." The king, annoyed by such superstitions, declared a feast to display his prize publicly. The humans were to sit at his table like pets, a mockery of diplomacy. Courtiers applauded the idea, though unease still simmered. The family was brought in, dressed in plain earth, clothing that seemed absurd beside jeweled robes. The boy gawked at towering alien dishes steaming with unknown meats. "Doesn't smell like pizza," he muttered, to the horror of courtiers who thought it was a coded insult. The girl placed her bear on the table as though introducing it to royalty. "This is Mr. Buttons," she said solemnly. Courtiers nearly choked on their laughter. The father raised his goblet politely. "Lovely spread. Though again, coffee would have been nice." Confused murmurs rippled. The king scowled, yet beneath the farce he sensed an undercurrent, like laughter in the face of execution. It was defiance disguised as manners. The mother, serene throughout, finally lifted her glass. Her eyes gleamed with quiet amusement as she spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Majesty, thank you for your hospitality." Courtiers nodded approvingly, eager for her to abase herself. But then she added, each word precise, each syllable laced with hidden threat. "You really shouldn't have brought us here." The lights flickered. Somewhere deep within the palace, alarm screamed. The goblets trembled on the table. Ministers leapt to their feet in panic. The king froze, talons tightening on his throne's armrest. The mother only sipped calmly from her cup, eyes never leaving his, as though she had merely commented on the weather. The alarms wailed through the marble halls like a wounded beast, shrill and unrelenting, bouncing from crystal to stone until every courtier's nerves frayed. Guards scrambled, wings clattering, weapons sparking, but the family at the long table barely shifted. The boy traced a finger along his goblet's rim, making it hum faintly. The girl adjusted her bear on the tablecloth as though the creature, limp and ragged, deserved a front-row seat to the panic. The father leaned back slightly, calm to the point of insult, as though he were watching a football game enter overtime. But it was the mother, serene, composed, sipping still from her cup, who transformed the laughter of minutes before into whispers of unease. The king rose, his massive shadow sprawling across jeweled pillars. "Who dares disrupt my banquet?" His roar split the chamber. Ministers cowered, heads bowed, but no answers came. The alarms did not stop. Somewhere, machinery failed. Somewhere else, doors sealed themselves without command. A guard stumbled into the chamber, panting, his armor scorched. "Majesty, the central grid is compromised." His words cracked like a whip across the court. Compromised. In the palace, in the seat of power. The king's talons gouged the floor, but his eyes flicked once toward the humans. He caught the mother lowering her glass, meeting his gaze without blinking. He snarled and pointed. "Take them back to confinement." Guards surged forward. The father rose, guiding his children with a casualness that seemed almost rehearsed, murmuring, "Stay close." The boy rolled his eyes but obeyed. The girl cradled her bear and whispered something to it in English. The guards did not understand, but the words, "Almost time, Mr. Buttons," carried more dread than any alien tongue. Rumors traveled faster than soldiers. By the time the family was escorted back to their chamber, servants already whispered of sabotage. Generators failing. Security locks jamming. A sentry claimed he had seen the boy crawling through a vent, though no one could explain how the child had slipped his bonds. Ministers argued in tight circles. Primitive creatures could not breach systems older empires had failed to crack. And yet alarms still screamed, lights still flickered. Something unseen stalked the palace corridors, and everywhere suspicion pointed back to the fragile family. Inside their cell, the humans sat cross-legged on the floor, tracing with crayon again. Guards watched, sneering. "Look, doodles." But the shapes grew sharper. Straight lines intersected with circles, patterns repeating like logic puzzles. The boy drew arrows. The girl colored sections in red. A technician passing by slowed, frowning. The patterns looked disturbingly like circuits. "Do you see?" he began, but another guard shoved him forward. "Children's scribbles," he snapped. Yet later that night, the lights in the guard barracks died precisely in the sequence the children had drawn. Panic followed. The king summoned his ministers. Their jeweled collars rattled as they argued. "Release them before this worsens," hissed one. "It will make us look weak," countered another. The old advisor, his skin translucent with age, spoke gravely. "Majesty, forgive boldness, but I believe these are no ordinary humans. I have heard whispers in the archives, tales from soldiers who fought long ago. They spoke of a human general who did not command armies, but rather predators. She taught them patience, silence, misdirection. Her name," he hesitated, glancing nervously toward the guards. "Her name was Helena Cortez. They called her the Widowmaker." The chamber chilled. Ministers who moments before had scoffed now shifted uneasily. The king slammed his claw down. "Fairy tales. This woman is a mate, a mother, nothing more." Yet the words rang hollow, because even he remembered faintly the reports. Fleets ambushed by impossible foresight, colonies lost to traps laid months in advance, enemies who laughed at peace tables until the last second. The empire had dismissed them as exaggerations. But the advisor's trembling voice planted the seed. Widowmaker. Could it be? In their cell, the family whispered in English. The father leaned against the wall, arms folded. He spooked. The boy smirked. "Should be. Mom hasn't even started yet." The girl giggled softly, muffled by her bear. The mother did not laugh. She was crouched near the floor, running fingers lightly across the energy coils that made their prison. To watching guards, it looked like idle curiosity. To her children, it was a lesson. "Every system has seams," she murmured. "You find them, you listen, you wait. Fear does half the work for you." The boy whispered back, "Like when we played hide and seek in the tunnels." She smiled faintly. "Exactly like that." By dawn, The palace was alive with tension. Ministers avoided each other's eyes. Soldiers doubled patrols. Servants whispered of human eyes glowing in the dark, of laughter echoing through vents, of children's shadows darting across forbidden corridors. Stories twisted with each telling, but always the same conclusion. The humans were not prey. They were hunters wearing soft skin. The king attempted reassurance. He summoned his court, spreading his wings wide. Order is mine. Power is mine. These mammals cannot unsettle me. Yet his words failed to quell the mutters. For even as he spoke, another alarm shrieked. A weapons cache detonated in the east wing, no casualties. But every schematic suggested a deliberate overload. The guards swore no one entered. Yet in the wreckage, melted into the floor, lay the faint imprint of crayon wax. The king raged. This is sabotage. But not by them. They lack the capacity. His voice thundered, but his ministers glanced sidelong, unwilling to meet his eyes. Because capacity was no longer in question. Will was. And these humans possessed it in abundance. That evening, the king decreed a show of dominance. The humans would attend another banquet, this time heavily guarded, their chains doubled, their movements controlled. They would witness his grandeur, and their spirit would break. He told himself this with conviction. Yet as the family was brought forth, it was not they who seemed subdued. The father looked faintly amused, as though enduring a tedious layover in an airport. The children whispered jokes to each other, causing guards to tighten their grips uneasily. The mother walked calmly, steps measured, eyes sharp. If this was defeat, it wore a convincing mask of control. They were seated before the court again. Food glistened under chandeliers. Alien nobles whispered, unable to look away. The king raised his chalice, bellowing, "To conquest eternal." The hall echoed half-heartedly. He turned, glaring at the family. "Drink, and know your place beneath me." The father lifted his goblet politely. "Cheers." He sipped unfazed. The boy muttered, "Tastes like swamp," and the girl stifled a laugh. The courtiers shifted, unsettled by levity, where fear was expected. The mother lifted her glass last. "Majesty," she said evenly, "conquest is indeed eternal. But so are consequences." The words slid like knives under silk. The ministers froze. Consequences. The king's throat rumbled with fury, yet something colder shivered through him. Doubt. That night, more guards vanished. One was found bound in a closet, humming earth lullabies, unable to explain why. Another was discovered standing motionless in a corridor, staring at the wall as though awaiting orders. Rumors spread that the humans had bewitched them. Superstition wrapped itself around fear, until even seasoned soldiers glanced over their shoulders. The old advisor returned, pale with dread. "Majesty, I beg you. If this truly is Cortez, the Widowmaker, then you have not captured a family. You have invited an army disguised as one." The king roared for silence, yet in his private chamber, when shadows stretched too long, he could not banish the echo of the advisor's words. Days blurred into unrest. Ministers argued about release, exile, execution. None agreed. All feared that whichever choice was made would mark the end. The humans remained calm, almost insultingly so. The boy whittled a piece of alien scrap into a makeshift toy. The girl tied a ribbon from her dress around her bear's neck. The father asked guards polite questions about shift rotations. And the mother, she walked, counted, measured, her eyes memorizing more than walls. She memorized weakness. On the seventh night, the power grid failed entirely for 3 minutes. When it returned, the surveillance feed replayed a brief image that froze the blood of every minister who saw it. The mother, standing in the dark, her children beside her, hand raised in silent command. The guards in the cell stood frozen, unmoving, as though awaiting her word. The feed cut, then resumed with everyone in place, pretending nothing had happened. But the impression remained: control. Not of machines, of soldiers. The ministers confronted the king, their voices rising. "Majesty, this is not captivity. It is siege from within." The king bared his teeth, but fear gnawed his certainty. He turned to his war council. Prepare contingency. If needed, purge them. Yet even as he said it, a flicker of dread coiled in his chest. Because he saw her in his mind's eye, calm, polite, sipping from her glass as alarm screamed. He feared he was not master of her fate, but already a piece on her board. And in the human chamber, the mother finally spoke to her family, low and certain. It's almost time. They are unraveling. One more push, and the king will expose himself. The father nodded, humor fading from his eyes, replaced by steel. The children leaned closer, listening. They did not look afraid. They looked ready. The palace trembled as another alarm split the night. Somewhere deep below, the first breach opened, not into the palace, but out of it. A signal carried on frequencies too old for alien sensors, too familiar for human ears to mistake. The beacon was lit. Help was already on its way. The beacon signal was faint, older than the palace's youngest bricks. Yet it pulsed through frequencies so ancient the alien sensors dismissed it as static. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long again. An SOS dressed in archaic code, slipping beneath the Empire's watchful eyes. The humans had not cried for help. They had lit a fire. The king stalked his war room, wings rattling in fury. Ministers argued over each other, their voices shrill. Purge them, one demanded. Release them before worse comes, another countered. Seal the palace entirely, shouted a third. The air stank of fear, hot and sour, clinging to their scaled hides. Yet the king silenced none of them, for he too felt the gnawing worm of dread. He had paraded his prize, mocked their fragility, and now shadows slipped through his walls. His empire trembled not under fleets, but under the quiet patience of a single family. In their cell, the humans sat calmly on the floor as though attending a picnic. The boy tapped rhythms on the stone with a scrap of metal. The girl hummed tunelessly while sewing a tear in her bear. The father leaned back against the wall with the posture of a man at rest. But the mother knelt in silence, hand pressed lightly against the glowing coils of their prison. Her eyes glinted in the low light, calculating the rhythm of the energy pulses. She whispered, so softly the guard strained to hear, almost ripe. The boy grinned. Want me to do it now? She shook her head. Patience. Let them sweat. Fear is fertilizer. The father chuckled under his breath. She does love her metaphors. The girl whispered to her bear. She's always right. Guards muttered uneasily. Their laughter sounded too measured, too timed. Like a rehearsal before a performance no one else understood. That night, the palace lost control of its airlocks. Not all of them, just enough to cause panic. A minister awoke to his chamber, hissing with depressurization, only to find it was an illusion triggered through hacked consoles. Another discovered his bed had been turned 90 degrees and bolted to the ceiling while he slept. No casualties, no overt violence, only humiliation and whispers. The humans had reached everywhere. Yet security logs showed no breach. The soldiers muttered about ghosts. The king snarled. Not ghosts. Wolves. The old advisor, translucent skin trembling, confronted him again. Majesty, I have studied the files. It is her, the Widowmaker. No army has ever beaten her, because she does not fight with armies. She fights with inevitability. She waits until you defeat yourself. The king's throat rattled with defiance, but doubt glistened in his eyes. Because in the silence between alarms, he too remembered old rumors, of fleets strangled in ambush, of colonies swallowed whole by traps sprung months after her touch. He told himself it was impossible. She had died. And yet, in her stillness, he saw the shadow of truth. When morning came, the humans were escorted not to their cell, but to the council chamber itself, an act of desperation disguised as confidence. They were seated across from generals and ministers, chains doubled, guards thick around them. The king towered over all, declaring, "You will answer for this treachery." His words reverberated through the hall. The father leaned forward, polite as a dinner guest. "Treachery's a strong word. We've just been adapting." The courtiers hissed. The boy snorted laughter. The girl hid her smile in the bear's fur, and the mother raised her gaze, calm and unyielding. "Majesty," she said, her voice low, precise. You kidnapped the wrong family. The chamber froze. Ministers exchanged terrified looks. Guards shifted uneasily. The king barked, "Explain yourself." But her silence was heavier than words. She let them stew, let their imaginations spiral. The father smiled faintly. She's not much for explanations. More of a results person. The boy muttered, "You'll see," and the girl whispered, "Almost time." The king lunged forward, talons scraping, but before his roar could land, the palace trembled. Distant explosions rippled through the foundations, controlled, surgical. The lights dimmed, replaced by an amber glow. Generals shouted. Soldiers scrambled, yet the humans remained seated, serene amid the storm. The mother's eyes gleamed. Beacon answered. In orbit, unseen by alien eyes, human warships uncloaked. They were not grand or ornate. They were lean, angular predators, their hulls scarred by wars fought in shadows. Their comms remained silent, their weapons cold, but their mere presence choked the Empire's breath. Ministers screamed of invasion, of betrayal, of doom. The king roared to fire every defense, but his generals faltered. For on their screens, the human fleet did not fire. It waited, watching, patient as the family it protected. Inside the palace, chaos thickened. Doors sealed unpredictably. Weapons misfired. Alarms screamed conflicting warnings. The human cell had never been breached. It had been surrendered. The boy's crayons were battle maps. The girl's ribbons marked circuits. The father's idle questions had mapped patrols. And the mother, she had turned fear into architecture. The king confronted her directly, his massive form looming, wings unfurled. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice cracking between rage and dread. She stood slowly, chains rattling, but her spine straight as steel. She met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. "I am Helena Cortez, General of the Terran Defense Corps. They called me the Widowmaker. You should have left my children alone." The hall gasped, ministers stumbling back as though struck. The father rose behind her, calm, proud. The boy whispered, "Told you so." The girl stroked her bear's head, murmuring, "They'll believe now." The king reeled, but he tried one last bluff. "You are trapped, surrounded by my guards, bound by my chains. You have no weapons." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Majesty, you misunderstand. You are the one trapped." As if on cue, every door in the chamber sealed with a clang. Guards tried to force them, but locks glowed red. Consoles sparked. Ventilation hissed. The palace itself had been claimed. The ministers wailed. The generals demanded orders. But the king could not speak, because in her stillness, in her calm, he saw his empire already dying. She did not need armies to topple him. She needed only his arrogance, his greed, his belief that prey never had teeth. Then a sound cut through the chaos. Children's laughter. The boy clapped his hands in rhythm. The girl hummed along. It was not cruel, not mocking, only playful, but it chilled the hall more than any threat. Because in that laughter was certainty. The game was already won. The guards lowered their weapons, some trembling, some frozen, as though the children themselves commanded them. The king staggered backward, tail lashing. "You cannot hold this empire. You cannot stand against the galaxy." Helena stepped forward, her chains falling free with a snap of overridden locks. "We don't need to," she said softly. "We only need to end you." Ministers gasped. Soldiers faltered. The Empire's heart skipped a beat. And in the war room above, human ships finally stirred. Weapon systems waking like wolves, raising their heads. They did not fire. Not yet. They waited, patient, merciless. Waiting for her word. The king drew himself tall, summoning the last dregs of defiance. "You would start a war with me?" His voice cracked, torn between fury and terror. Helena tilted her head, eyes calm, voice polite. "Majesty, you already did." The hall trembled as the palace's defenses collapsed one by one, each failure timed, orchestrated, inevitable. Ministers whispered prayers. Soldiers backed away. And in the center, Helena Cortez, once captive, now commander, stood with her family at her side. A mother, yes, but also the galaxy's most ruthless tactician, smiling as the trap snapped shut. Above the palace, the first human strike cruisers drifted into formation, their shadows blotting out the stars. The throne chamber shook as distant detonations rolled through the palace, controlled blasts carving away defenses like flesh from bone. Ministers clung to jeweled pillars, their ornate robes trembling with their limbs. Guards scrambled, weapons raised, though half no longer knew where to aim. The air stank of ozone and panic, of an empire unraveling at its seams. At the center, Helena Cortez stood unbound, chains fallen at her feet, her children at her side, her husband leaning with calm amusement against the ruined dais. The galaxy's most ruthless tactician had revealed herself, and the king's empire was discovering what it meant to cage a predator. The king roared, talons gouging furrows into the marble floor. His wings unfurled, vast and glittering, an image of power that had once silenced worlds. You think a handful of ships and your tricks can topple me? I am ruler of half the stars, master of legions beyond counting. His voice rattled the chamber, a desperate thunder. Helena tilted her head, expression polite, almost pitying. And yet, she said softly, you invited death into your dining hall. The boy grinned, unable to resist. Dad always says, never invite Mom somewhere unless you're ready for her to rearrange the furniture. Courtiers flinched at the human child's levity, as if even their jokes dripped with threat. The girl hugged her bear, whispering, almost done, Mr. Buttons. And though it was a child's murmur, soldiers shifted uneasily, as though the stuffed toy itself had become an omen. Above the planet, the human fleet tightened its noose. Alien ships scrambled, but their comms filled with static, jamming woven from frequencies so old the Empire systems could not parse them. Human vessels did not fire immediately. They circled, patient as sharks, letting panic erode discipline. Screens across the palace flickered with their shadows, angular hulls blotting stars, a silent promise of violence. The king lunged from his dais, towering over Helena, his wings casting her in shadow. I will tear you apart with my own claws, he hissed. She met his eyes without a flicker of fear. Majesty, she said, voice level as a blade's edge, you've already lost. He struck, a talon slicing toward her throat. She sidestepped with surgical precision, seized the base of his wing, and twisted. The sound cracked through the chamber like splitting stone. The king screamed, staggering. His pride struck deeper than flesh. Ministers gasped. Guards faltered. And Helena released him with deliberate calm, as though to prove he was not even worth holding. He roared again, thrashing, striking in wild fury, but each blow met air. She moved with ruthless efficiency, every step calculated, every turn prepared. She was not a brawler. She was a tactician teaching anatomy with pain. A knee to his ribs staggered him. An elbow to his jaw snapped his head sideways. When his claws raked the ground, she stepped upon them, pinning him as though subduing a beast in training. And through it all, her expression never shifted from cool composure, as though disciplining a child who had mistaken tantrum for power. Around them, the palace disintegrated into chaos. Generals shouted for orders, but soldiers hesitated. Their weapons sagged, their eyes darted to Helena, to her husband's calm smile, to the children's laughter that rang like bells over a graveyard. The father finally spoke, voice dry and cutting. Funny thing about power, he said to the generals. It evaporates the moment you realize you're standing on the wrong side of history. His words slipped into them like hooks. More weapons lowered. Some soldiers outright dropped theirs, backing away, unwilling to fight a family that looked more certain than any empire. The king, battered but not yet broken, spat blood and defiance. Even if you kill me, the galaxy will rise against you. Humanity will be crushed beneath the weight of my legions. Helena leaned close, her voice so soft only he and those nearest could hear. Majesty, do you think this is about you? His eyes widened, confusion breaking through rage. You were never the target. You were bait. And you took it. He staggered, realization dawning too late. Bait. Her eyes burned. Every human family you ever heard of, everyone you dismissed as prey, they volunteered to be lures. You kidnapped the wrong people, because there are no right ones. We were waiting for you to make the mistake. Above, human warships shifted formation. Their weapon systems hummed to life, elegant and merciless. Across the Empire, hidden signals awoke, sleeper traps planted long before, sabotage disguised as trivial glitches. Colonies, strongholds, fleets, each had been seeded with quiet inevitability. The king's empire had not been invaded tonight. It had been collapsing for months, waiting only for her word. Ministers shrieked, demanding surrender. Generals dropped to their knees. Soldiers fled the chamber. And through it all, Helena stood with quiet dignity, her children pressing close, her husband resting a steady hand on her shoulder. She did not roar, she did not boast. She simply was. And that was terror enough. The king, broken and desperate, charged one final time, talons raised in blind rage. Helena met him head-on, sidestepped, and drove her palm into his chest. The impact cracked through his armor, sending him sprawling across the dais. He collapsed, wings shattered, eyes dimming with disbelief. He tried to speak, to summon some last claim of dominion, but only blood spilled from his lips. Helena crouched beside him, her tone still polite, her smile faint. Hospitality noted, consequences delivered. His eyes widened, and then the king of half the stars was still. Silence fell heavy over the chamber. Ministers trembled, waiting for her to speak, for the judgment to descend. She rose, gathered her children close, and turned to the hall. Earth does not seek conquest, she said softly. But when you come for our families, you invite extinction. Her words rippled like shockwaves, repeated in whispers, recorded on trembling devices, carried already beyond these walls to every corner of the empire. Soldiers lowered their heads. Ministers collapsed in weeping bows. A dynasty had ended, not with grand speeches, but with a mother standing calm beside her children. Above the planet, the human fleet fired at last. Precision strikes lit the sky, severing the empire's command grid, tearing its arteries cleanly. Ships fell silent. Outposts went dark. What had been invincible yesterday was ash tonight. And still the humans held back, destroying only what was necessary, leaving survivors to tell the tale. Mercy and terror intertwined until neither could be told apart. The father finally broke the hush, his voice dry as desert wind. Well, honey, that was one hell of a dinner party. The boy laughed, the girl hid her smile in her bear's fur, and even Helena's lips softened into something like warmth. But her eyes never left the ministers groveling on the floor, never stopped calculating. She knew this night was not just victory. It was beginning. She led her family toward the shattered doors. Guards stepped aside, heads bowed, none daring to stop them. The palace trembled behind them, firelight flickering against the night. The people of the empire would awaken tomorrow to a new world, one ruled not by the king's shadow, but by the story of the humans who had walked into his hall and undone him. At the threshold, Helena paused, her children at her side, her husband's hand steady on her arm. She looked back once at the ruin, the broken body on the dais, the fearful eyes of ministers who now understood what humanity was. Her voice carried through the silence, soft but sharp as a blade. We don't start wars. We end them. And as she stepped into the smoke and starlight, the human fleet above descended, their engines roaring like the breath of ancient beasts. The galaxy, watching, shuddered. The trap had sprung. The king had fallen, and the whispers of doom became prophecy fulfilled.